everyone, to Friday Night Chat, to the second episode in 2022. I am excited to welcome to the chat room Dr. Jeremy Butler. Yay. The Love Family Christian Foundation sponsors Friday Night Chat, and we also partner with Judson University as well. So I'm really excited, and he's going to talk about community policing. But before we do that, because it's Black History Month, I just want to go back and share a little timeline with you about African Americans in law enforcement. So just bear with me 1 minute while I get that information up, and I hope everybody can hear me. All right. So in 1867, African American officers, police officers, were appointed to the police department in Selma, Alabama. And then they were soon followed by, in 1868, officers in Jackson, Florida. And in 1870, officers in Houston and Galveston, Texas. In 1870, 177 African American officers were inducted, and 3 of 5 were appointed to the board were African Americans. In April 12, 1870, Officer William Johnson of Jacksonville, Florida, became the first recognized African American police officer killed in the line of duty. In 1875, Bass Reeves is appointed as the first African American deputy U.S. Marshal. 1916, Georgia Ann Robinson became the first African American woman police officer serving in the Los Angeles Police Department. In 1928, Dr. Lewis Tompkins Wright was the first known African American police surgeon. He would later become the president of the NAAC Board of Directors. In 1941, William Lindsay became the first known African American state trooper hired by the Illinois State Police. 1966, Sheriff Lucius Emerson is one of the first elected African American sheriffs serving in Malcolm County, Alabama. 1972, the National Black Police Association was chartered, and in 1976, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive was founded. And in 1988, Willie L. Williamson became one of the first African American police commissioners. He served in Philadelphia and would subsequently become the first African American commissioner of the Los Angeles Police Department in 1992. So when I pulled this data, it said that there were approximately 58,000 African American officers who work in the U.S. police agencies today. But it's a bit dated. It was dated back in 2017, so that was 5 years ago. So I'm sure the numbers have expanded. I hope that they have increased. So let me just take a moment for all of you who have served in law enforcement to say thank you and God bless you for your service. It's just been an incredible journey. And when I go back and I look at the history of law enforcement, I'm just very thankful to be here in America. No matter what people say about it, I'm thankful to be in this place. So God bless you and bless you for your service. Okay. Now, let's get into this introduction for Dr. Butler. I met Dr. Butler at Judson University. I remember seeing him. It must have been after a faculty assembly meeting, and he was standing out there by himself. And I was like, "Who is he? I want to adopt him." You know how I am. I want to know him. Who is he? And I found that he is a phenomenal brother. He is the assistant professor of health promotion and performance at Judson University. He served as police officer for 7 years at the Illinois State University. He received his BS in Kinesiology from U of I, Urbana-Champaign, where he was nominated and accepted into the McNair Scholars Program. This is a program which provides research, mentoring, advisory, and graduate school preparation opportunities to promote academic excellence. Dr. Butler received an MS in Recreation Administration from Illinois State University, and then his Ph.D. in Kinesiology at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. And he's also working on a project now that I'll give him the floor to share. But welcome, Dr. Butler. I'm excited today to talk about community policing because I think it is very, very important today. How do we engage these communities to become their very personal best? And how do we try to build trust in the communities that are underserved. So you have the floor.
Thank you for having me. Well, I guess you just kind of gave the introduction. Not sure what more to say, but I mean, I'm happy to be here. I've been in the Elgin area for only about probably about a year and a half now. I'm originally from South Side of Chicago, so I was born and raised. Prior to being here, I was in Bloomington, Illinois for about 10 years. Recently made my transition out of law enforcement and into the field of academia and police reform work. And the project that Dr. Love's speaking of is a book that I recently wrote that'll be released this summer, essentially all about how we can bridge the gap between the police and the community by way of a passion of mine, which is the martial arts.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. Well, Dr. Butler, you know that my passion has been leadership, and I've sort of framed all of my interviews around leadership. So I wanted to just dig into that topic just a little bit before we get into community policing. How would you describe your leadership style?
Um, I would say, I guess it depends on what I'm leading. So if we're talking like organizationally speaking through business, I'd say more democratic in nature. So I really like to bring the team into the decision-making process, hear multiple viewpoints, and really make it more of a discussion and collective, uh, decision-making. But as a teacher, right, if we're speaking like academically, or even as a martial arts instructor, which I spent most of my life doing, I'd say it's more of a coaching style, and that I like to leverage the strengths of the team that I'm working with. So really, I think when you're able to leverage strengths, you're able to really maximize the potential, growth of the team. And people tend to enjoy their roles better when they're in a space that they're comfortable and they're in a space where they feel valued and they feel that they are competent. So I really try to find the natural strengths that I see in people and put them in those types of positions that allow them to leverage that.
Okay, excellent. What leaders inspire you?
What leaders inspire me? You spoke on, this being Black History Month, and I definitely say um, that's always been like something that really intrigued me is Black history and really learning from the leaders in Black history. I guess
Mhm.
some that stand out would be like Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X, Carter G. Woodson. I say those would be my top three. And the reason I say that is I feel like they were kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word radical, but they weren't afraid to speak out, even if it wasn't necessarily popular views or popular perspectives. And I've always appreciated that. And Carter G. Woodson in particular, it's kind of interesting because so where I grew up in Chicago, there's a library on 95th and Hosted. It's called Carter G. Woodson Library. And I used to, pass it every day on the bus. And I would go there after school sometimes. And I never knew who Carter G. Woodson was. And I mean, I spent years going to that library. And then one day I think I was in high school and I was just curious. I'm like, who is Carter G. Woodson? And found that, he was really the person responsible for why we have a Black History Month. And I looked deeper into his story. He was, did a lot of his work out of Chicago. And his big thing was the fact that African Americans weren't really getting the credit that they deserved as far as their contributions to history, right? World history as well as US history. So he kind of sought out to create that change. So he would write books, he would create academic journals to really push the message of the contributions of African Americans. So that really spoke to me and kind of really empowered me. So I would say when I think about leaders, he's one that really inspired me because of that story.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Now, just switching over to community policing, what are some of the goals of community policing?
Okay, so I'd say it's pretty broad, but really it's about building that collaborative environment between the police and the community, right, in which they serve. So I'd say the goal is solving whatever problems are occurring in the community, but the emphasis needs to be on that collaborative piece, right? So we're trying to increase positive police-citizen interactions, build that community trust, and really use that as a means to resolve, again, any issues that come up in that space. So I think that's the ultimate goal of community policing.
Okay. Okay. Very difficult to do.
It can be, for sure, especially in this day and age, because community trust takes time, and I think a big disconnect we have is that, first there has to be officer buy-in, right? And there has to be these genuine efforts to connect with the community. And that also has to be accepted by the community. And sometimes we have this issue where it's not necessarily accepted for reasons that I can understand, considering a lot of the history of policing and and its impact on the communities, particularly minority communities. So it's really difficult, I think, to really bridge or mend that history, and that takes time, right? So that's the struggle, I think.
Okay. So what are some of the essential elements besides trust in collaboration and influencing a community to police positively?
So other elements,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say programming is one, if I'm
Okay.
understanding your question
Mm-hmm.
correctly. I
Yes.
think there needs to be proactive program initiatives to create these opportunities uh, for building these relationships. And that's not, that is why I would say that there's a reason for having units in law enforcement that are designed for community policing. But I also think, to a certain extent, when you have a unit, it can become problematic, because then it almost brings the message that only people in that unit should be doing community policing, right? So
Yes.
when you start to compartmentalize it, it becomes problematic. But at the same token, I think there needs to be a deliberate initiative toward creating these opportunities. So that's where it kind of gets shaky. But I think a major element is establishing set units for that purpose. But really, the ultimate goal should be for every officer in a department to be on the same page in terms of this drive for mending these tensions between the law enforcement and the community. So being deliberate about programming, because we have to create opportunities for these connections to occur, right? And that could be by way of things like ride-along programs, right? I think that helps, where a civilian has an opportunity to really experience what it's like on the inside in terms of what an officer's day looks like, and ask questions, and create that moment where you can get that one-on-one connection. Programs like that, I think, are extremely helpful. Or even full-on citizen police academies, where they get the complete insight of what it's like, what law enforcement is like, because I think it'll create a certain sense of empathy, for what officers go through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. What are some of the barriers to good police community relations? What are some of the barriers?
Whew, I'd say, let me give some thought for a second.
Okay.
So I'm gonna try to, because this puts me in a unique place, because I'm a Black man in America, and then I also have experience as a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes I can definitely see both sides, and I feel sometimes divided, even when I'm having these type of conversations. So I'll start from the civilian perspective, right? So
Okay.
I think one major barrier when we're talking about creating these community relations is knowledge of the law, or a lack of knowledge of the law.
Okay.
So oftentimes I've seen situations where there's this perception that rights are being violated when it's actually not the case, and it's a misunderstanding of the law, right?
Mm.
And then an
Yeah.
argument ensues, and then we start to, again, get this disconnect, and it just builds, right? And a lot of this is often based on past experiences. So when you have, and myself included, I mean, the first the first and only time I've ever had a gun pulled on me was by a police officer. And I was about 13 years old,
Mm.
right? So experiences like that
Yeah.
create, for some, it could be lifelong distrust.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to mend that, right? And so
Mhm.
when you have an experience like that, fortunately, I was able to, come to senses with that situation, and my perspectives aren't the same as my perspectives were when I was a teenager. That's for
Sure.
sure. But I think for some people, those experiences could traumatize them, and for the rest of their life, any police officer they come across, whether it's a good cop or a bad cop, they're all bad cops to that person because of that
Mhm.
experience. So I think the big barrier there is not only knowledge of whether or not you are really being done wrong, or it's whether or not it's a misunderstanding, but also from the civilian standpoint, understanding that not all officers are the same, and at least give them that chance to show that they're not the same, rather than shutting it down just from seeing the uniform, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so to me, that's the big picture on the civilian side. Then when we flip to the perspective of the officer, I think it's a matter of patience, because I think a lot of police officers, they'll get in a situation where they have an encounter with a civilian, and that civilian may be someone like me who had a really horrible experience as my first introduction to law enforcement. So any cop they come across, there's a distrust, there's probably an attitude, there's negativity, and this officer takes it personally. And then now it's like, again, this buildup of tension.
Sure.
So from the side of the officer, it's a matter of patience and empathy for what the experiences of the civilian may have been before, with previous officers, and going into every citizen encounter with that level of patience and empathy,
Mhm.
and tactical communication, being careful about how you speak, because it can be triggering for people. So
Mhm.
rather than what they call the axe tail make philosophy of policing, you ask them to do something, then you tell them, then you make them do it. More of a ask them to do something, explain why you're asking them to do what you're asking a
Why?
civilian to do, setting context for what's occurring, and painting that picture for them. And you're much more likely to get compliance, and much more likely to have a more positive interaction.
Mhm.
Should I stop there, or should I give you my third point? I feel like I talked.
No, go ahead. Keep going. Keep
Okay.
going.
And then I think the third element for this is really getting rid of this us versus them mentality that I think has been created in the
Mm.
subcultures of policing and civilians. There's this
Okay.
literally this divide where there's the civilian side where we don't trust the police, we don't mess with the police. It's just this complete disconnect. And then there's, whether or not officers want to admit it, there's this blue code of silence. There's this, this side of, feeling like the community doesn't appreciate law enforcement. So the
Mm.
officers will move into this little hub, or this little bubble, or this little fraternity. And again, to me, both of those are not right. We have to unify. And if we don't, if we have this perspective of this divisiveness, it's going to be extremely hard for any progress to be made in that situation. Sorry, I know there's a
Excellent.
lot.
No. I'm glad that's a great segue into the next question, because people talk about, there's a lot of research about unconscious racial bias and how that impacts human behavior. What's your perspective on that?
um, I definitely, believe and know that, racial bias exists, and it is oftentimes unconscious. And I think with that, from a law enforcement perspective, I think it's important officers acknowledge that it exists. And I think that's a big barrier, is some officers don't necessarily acknowledge the fact that they can have, bias, and but the reality is everyone has bias. Everyone, everyone has an unconscious bias. I mean, if you're human, you have that. So when we accept that we all have it, I think it makes it easier for us to really check yourself if you notice that may be influencing your decision making or influencing your thought process, right? So when you're consciously aware of what your biases are, then you can much better control them, right? So I think that's where it starts on the topic of bias. But and then also I think a big element of that is checking fellow officers as well. So if an officer sees another officer who seems to be showing some sort of bias, and I don't even want to use the word checking them. I don't like the tone of that. Maybe educating them, or maybe inquiring on, okay, what made you make that decision, right? What was it? Because maybe it was something that the other officer may have missed. So you don't want to be accusatory, but I definitely don't think, I guess my point is, I don't think we should do the opposite, where it's like, remaining silent when you see something that could be problematic or something that concerns you, right? So even from the inside, I think it's important for officers to, even a better term, hold each other's accountable, for these standards.
Good. And then one final question concerning community policing is that should cultural competency be a required component of police training?
Yes, and I mean it is. Well, at least in Illinois, I can't really speak for other states, but in Illinois, it is a requirement of law enforcement, both in the academy and in their in-service. So every 3 years, officers go through cultural competency training by law. As a matter of fact, in last year in 2021, they actually added a component to that and made it more specifically requiring implicit bias training, racial and ethnic sensitivity training as well. So that is present. Now, we can further this and ask the question of, is it effective? Right? Does going through this training actually help? And my thoughts on that would be, it depends on whether the officer is willing to receive that information, right? So if you have an officer that goes into this training closed-minded and spends their entire time in this training, with their arms crossed, and it's like, it doesn't apply to me type of, and I don't think the message will be received very well. But if an officer goes in with an open mind and ready to listen and hear these perspectives, I definitely think it could be transformative. And I've had officers in my department that I worked at, I've had a lot of countless conversations with officers on topics like this. And I have seen transformations occur in their perspectives and their thoughts when it comes to these issues and I think, honestly, this leads to another thing, of minority representation in law enforcement, because it's much easier for the officer to hear it when it's coming from someone who, I guess, was in my position, that is a minority male, but also understands the life of a police officer. It's easy for the officer to hear it versus someone on the outside, right? Which is how they view it, which is that divisive mentality that I was talking about, us versus them, right? So if they see somebody from the outside trying to tell them something, it's like, you don't understand. But when they have somebody who is on the inside, but also has the experiences on the outside, they can inform both communities. And this is the place that I found myself in for the 7 years of my life in law enforcement and beyond, is speaking to people in the Black community. And sometimes maybe it's in my head, but sometimes feeling like they have an issue with my perspectives, or they disagree with my perspectives, and then having conversations with police officers and getting that same energy, like, oh no, you're not getting it. So that's kind of I don't know, that's the gift and the curse of being right, on both sides in terms of that.
That's excellent. Now, inquiring minds want to know, should the pastor's wife have a conceal and carry license?
The pastor's wife has a concealed carry license.
Look at Jerry smiling at y'all.
He knows.
If she's right, it's her right. As long as you're trying with it.
Yeah. Training out. Yeah, that's good.
That is definitely the critical component, is the training.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking on that subject, what do you think about the iTarget apps? And I don't know what that thing is called. It's called iTarget, where you can actually do target practice by laser in your home.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like it. I mean, any opportunity you have to get that, consistency and training in whatever it is you're trying to do, I think is huge. Yeah, because it does become problematic when people, they'll decide to carry whatever weapon they want to carry for their peace of mind and for self-defense, but then it remains, in their purse or in their bag or whatever, and they never take it out, they never train with it, never practice with it. I mean, at that point, it's going to be used against you more likely than you being able to use it. If you're an attacker, right? You're more likely to have that attacker, take it from you. So, I mean, if you're going to choose to carry anything, it's very important that you have consistent training in it.
Training, absolutely.
Hey, Karen, my gun club, I mean, we have a lot of members who use that tool just because of the cost of ammo. It's pretty expensive to go out and shoot 40 cents a round or 60 cents a round. So, you don't get the recoil and you don't get the actual, recoil from the weapon itself, but it still allows you to practice. And there's a variety of different ways that you can practice to kind of create that muscle memory when you use that weapon.
Especially, and I think it's, weapons access is, to me, the most critical, because I mean, when you get it on target, whatever that weapon is, okay, that's fine, but how are you going to access it in that moment, in the heat of the moment? It's not like an attacker is going to warn you and say, hey, I'm coming, here I come, get ready, so being able to access whatever your tool is quickly and effectively and efficiently, to me, that should be the bulk of the training, is where do you keep it, and how are you gonna access it when you have less than a second to make that decision.
That's true. Yeah, that's
I teach.
You all heard it on Zoom. Yeah.
I teach a self-defense course at Judson, and that's one of the things that I talk to the students about at length, is that I get a million questions from the students about what they legally can carry, what they can have, what they can't have. And I'm like, well, you need to know if you're within the law, of course, but if you have these tools, are you prepared to use them, both physically and then also ethically speaking too, right? Are you prepared to shoot someone if you had to? Because that takes a lot, to do that. I mean, it had to be a really, serious situation for something like that to occur. So even thinking about that, the ethical side of it, and whether or not a person has that in them to do it is another big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great segue, Dr. Butler, into your training in martial arts, the Pagoda Rebirth. I said it right. Did I say it right? Would you talk about that a little bit? I'm going to show you all a slide just quickly. Am I able to share the screen? I have no access. Oh, here we go. So here's Dr. Butler here. And this is all Pagoda, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So Pagoda Rebirth Martial Arts is my martial arts business. It's primarily focused on self-defense workshops, seminars, things of that nature. More recently, at least. But from the time I've started the business, and when I was in Bloomington, I was in an actual facility, and it was more focused on private lessons and my community development initiative. So I guess I can kind of explain these pictures. They'll give you kind of a good context of my life with this this business over the years. So, you know, the picture of me outside with the girls, that was a girls' summer camp that I was hired to train them in basic self-defense as part of that summer camp. The middle photo was my youth martial arts program. So this one is like near and dear to me. So I got my start in martial arts through a church ministry on the south side of Chicago. It was a park district behind Trinity United Church Christ. And in that park district, they had a nonprofit martial arts program for youth in the community. And that's how I got my start. So when I, you know, came into adulthood, I really want to have something similar to that as part of my business. So I started this program at Western Avenue Community Center in Bloomington, which is a faith-based community center. So I offered martial arts training essentially for free. Well, at least it was completely nonprofit for youth in that community. And I had that program running from 2014, and it finally closed at the end of literally 2 months ago, at the end of this year. And so that was a really big one for me throughout my life. It was a very tough decision, but just me being over 2 hours away and resources with instructors, I had to let it go, right? And then pretty much all of the other photos you see are just different workshops I've done with different organizations. The one on the bottom right was actually at a church in Bloomington. It was for church ministry. And then the one in the middle was one of my private students in my facility in Bloomington.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's excellent. Excellent. Questions from the audience?
So is this martial art your personal style? And if so, is it a combination of a variety of different styles? What did you start off doing?
Good question. Good question. So the base system is Pagoda martial arts system. It was developed by a man named Dr. Shorty Mills out of Chicago. And it is a blend of 5 different styles of martial arts. So karate is the base for the system, but it's karate, taekwondo, aikido, kempo, and jujitsu. So it's 5 arts sort of blended together. So he had a striking foundation, so karate and taekwondo, and then added aikido, and then he started to explore really the blend of different arts and understanding that every art has strengths and weaknesses. Every art, different arts can meld well together, right? So you can't always be in range to throw kicks. So what happens if you're not in that range? Or you can't always be in range to throw punches. What happens in that situation? You may need to grapple. So he pretty much blended a system of arts together to give this complete martial art. So if you have any situation that you're faced with, you're prepared regardless of that range. So that is my base system. That's the art that I'm a 4th degree black belt in. But I also teach Kali, which is Filipino martial arts. So it's based on stick and knife training out of the Philippines. So I teach that as well. And then I also teach Jeet Kune Do concepts, which is more of a philosophy of martial arts developed by Bruce Lee. And it's this idea of really being, expressing the art that is tailor-made for you, right? Your way of training, whatever that is. So we have a foundational techniques and skills, and then from there you really find your own philosophies and your own way of fighting, essentially. And then now the most recent art that I've been exploring, and the last one, as far as my exploration through the ranks, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And again, that is in the Pagoda system, but I found that was probably the art that I was, I guess you could say, weakest in terms of skill, was dealing with when the fight goes to the ground. And so I decided to start studying that, and also for law enforcement purposes. I wholeheartedly believe grappling arts are the best arts for police officers, which is essentially what my book is largely about, is exploring those arts. But yeah, so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a grappling art. So majority of the art is on the ground in control. So if you think of like wrestling or judo, similar to that, with the goal of submitting the person. So that's been the most recent exploration.
Yeah, I could tell from one of the pictures that Karen showed that, there was some
Yeah,
Bruce Lee influence or Kung Fu influence and
Mhm.
and the way your hand was, yeah, that one with your white shirt on. So
Mhm.
I'm a crouching tiger.
So do you train as well?
Yeah, I used to. So like yourself, I started, with karate, and then it turned into taekwondo, and then when I was in the Marine Corps, we had the Marine Corps style of martial arts, which I think that's what they call it now, is Marine Corps martial arts,
Mhm.
and then Kempo, and so and frankly, I used to do competitions, full contact stuff, real crazy stuff. And then I got tired of breaking bones and stuff like that. So, at some point I do have to work, and so, but it's one of the reasons I was so interested in joining. One, your background's impressive, but two, I've got younger kids, and I'm going to introduce them to martial arts, and I will resume it as well, just from a physical kind of exercise standpoint. I really enjoyed the katas, particularly with taekwondo. And used to do it along the beach and early morning, and so really it's just for physical therapy for me at this point. No more full contact, competition. I say that now, right? I'm not.
I hear you.
Yeah,
Yes, great questions.
thoroughly enjoy it. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's definitely, it takes a toll on your body. I mean,
I was one of those kids, I'm sure like you, were on Saturday mornings we watch the Kung Fu movies, like cartoons, and big fan of Bruce Lee, and studied him, and still study his quotes and sayings and his philosophy. I mean, he's very adept and
Mhm.
beyond his years, but no, it's and plus it's fun too. At the end of the day, it's fun.
And it's definitely good. It's a great way of, again, building that community, right? You develop these lifelong friendships, lifelong connections with people, even, building with your family. So my mother actually trained with me. She passed away in 2018. But that was our thing together. So we got our black belts together. So she trained with me for pretty much the entire time. I think I started maybe a month or two before she did, and it really was a way of connecting us. It built that connection with me and her, that unique connection, through that. So yeah, I mean, it's so many benefits, right? It goes so much beyond punching and kicking. So a lot of versatility.
It's funny you mentioned that, because as I indicated earlier, that's kind of what I want to do with my youngest kids, is to do it with them, right? And to just have that as an activity that we do together. Like Karen Jade is like, she's got the body to do taekwondo. I mean, she just loves
That is great.
martial arts, and watching all the martial arts films that we watch. We just watched The Five Rings last night again. she's like trying to emulate, all the moves in it. But I look at her just from a trained eye, can tell that she has like natural gifted abilities to really like incorporate that in her regimen pretty quickly. Just needs training. So
yeah, I believe there's definitely an art for everyone. It's just a matter of being willing to explore it. And for some people, like it doesn't have to be about the combative side. Like I know a lot of people who, are literally in their 70s and 80s, and Tai Chi is a great art that works for them. It's a lot slower. The movement is slower. It has health benefits. And, so I really believe that there's something for everyone. Everyone should at least try it and explore it, and see where it takes them. But particularly when I'm speaking to police officers, I always recommend grappling arts. And for me, the big picture behind that is it's much better. Like the one, I'm not gonna call it a problem, but I guess I'll call it a limitation, because every art has limitations. the one limitation of the striking arts is, if you're in a real situation, it's very hard to half punch someone or you're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. Right. So, I mean, there's control, obviously, but is that something that you want to trust if you're in a potentially life or death situation? That exercise of control that you would do in a dojo to protect your training partner, I'm not sure if that's a good idea to do in a real situation when you can be really hurt. So you kind of have to do what you have to do. And the thing that the grappling arts affords is the ability to control the amount of force that you apply on someone. So if you get up close to someone and you clinch with them, you can stop them from hitting, you can stop them from harming you. And you can control the amount of damage you do to them, particularly if you get them to the ground if the situation warrants that. That's a limitation of grappling arts, right? Not every environment warrants you going to the ground. But in those circumstances, particularly like in law enforcement, when they're gonna place someone in cuffs that's actively resisting, I haven't seen too many situations where you don't take them to the ground, right? Maybe sometimes they'll end up against a car or against a wall. But for the most part, when you have someone who's actively being violent toward the officer, the first thing that's going to happen is that it's going to, whether they take it there, whether the officer takes it there, or whether nature takes it there, they slip and fall, it ends up on the ground. So being able to be in that position, obtain a dominant position and control, right? You can literally talk a person. You're not going anywhere, right? You can tell them straight, we're not going anywhere. You let me know when you're ready. For the cuffs to come on, but it's hard to do that with striking arts, right? And then everybody has cameras going, everybody's watching. It just doesn't look good to beat a person into submission, even if maybe you're warranted in doing that based on what the circumstances are. I think it's much more humane and much more effective, oftentimes, to place them in a position where they can't do anything and straight up have that conversation. Look, I see you're frustrated. Now I can start talking them down. I see you're upset. I need you to relax for me and place your hands behind your back. You can talk to them. So I don't know. That's I guess why I push grappling arts so much, because of that ability. And it really needs to be circumstances where you're training in the art where you're able to practice that live, right, against live resistance. This is why I like wrestling, for example. Wrestling is very underrated. And some people don't even consider wrestling a martial art. I certainly do. It's one of the first martial arts, one of the original martial arts. And the wrestler's ability to take a person off their feet and control them, for the sake of example. So arts like that, and the fact that they practice it day in and day out against someone who doesn't want to get taken down. There's some arts where it's built mostly on compliance, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily bad, because you get a false sense of security, right? If you practice these techniques, and every time you've ever practiced it, your partner was allowing you to do everything that was happening. And then you get in that real situation, and this person isn't extending their arm out for you to, apply that, technique. It totally changed the dynamic, and it could be a shock for that officer the first time they get, punched in the mouth trying something, because they haven't had those experiences.
As Mike Tyson says, we all have a plan until we get punched in the mouth.
I have a presentation, so I teach at the police.
Which is a true statement, right?
It is.
You're punch in the mouth. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I teach at the Police Training Institute in Champaign. So I give a talk for the recruits there quarterly. So at the end of each recruit class, they have me come down, and I have an hour presentation that I give on the importance of consistency in training and how that impacts officer confidence. And I literally have a slide of Mike Tyson with that quote, right? Because a lot of people have this thought, we especially see this a lot of times with older officers too, but they have this thought that it's what I call the I'll just tase them mentality, where they just say, I don't need the control tactic stuff, I'll just tase them, right? And that's the thing, everybody has a plan to get punched in the mouth, right? You go to draw the taser and you get hit that first time for real, it just totally changes. It takes the fight completely out of you if you haven't experienced that level of pressure, stress, so that type of training is so critical, I feel.
Yeah, in the Marines, I mean, we got hit in the face purposely, just so it would never surprise you when that happens, right? Mm-hmm. You get that shock value out of the way, that's going to happen, right? So Just get it out of the way, recognize it. The trick is to still stay in the game, right?
And I think that's a part of the issue of excessive force, in America. Like a lot of these excessive force situations with law enforcement have a lot to do with, I believe, fear. They are genuinely in fear sometimes of what could happen, and it causes them to overreact versus an officer who is confident and knows what he's capable of or she is capable of. They're much more likely to be able to remain calm in that situation, to be able to speak more effectively, de-escalate more effectively, and not even have to end up using force at all, right? Because of the way they carry themselves, right? So a lot of the training, I think, helps that. Some people will argue, and I've had this, some people argue, well, if you're training cops to fight, they're going to fight more. I don't believe that to be the case. I believe when they do get into the fights, they're going to fight more effectively, and we're going to see reductions in issues of injuries to civilians as well as injuries to officers, because they can control the situation. And there has been one major department, actually there's been two departments that have come out, and they've actually collected the data on that. And they found once they added consistent control tactics intervention, particularly in grappling arts, they found reductions in taser deployments, reductions in use of force situations, as well as injuries to the officers and civilians. So there isn't much, but there's data out there now that's supporting this concept of providing more of this training that many people felt may create the opposite effect.
I had one last question. I saw one of your students on the slide that Karen showed. He looked like he does mixed martial arts or MMA. Do your students do that, or do they participate? That guy down there, do they participate in that? What are your thoughts of that?
When you say MMA, are you referring to like cage fighting?
Yeah, the cage
Okay.
fighting.
So no, they don't do cage fighting, but the concept of MMA, yes. So the Pagoda system, for example, the concept of the Pagoda system is mixing martial arts, right? That's what MMA is, mixed martial arts. So Taekwondo gives you great kicking. Karate gives you a good blend of that kicking and punching. Jiu-Jitsu gives you great grappling. So we're really mixing these concepts and using what's best. That student, Judson, he's actually he was one of my Jeet Kune Do students. So most of his training with me was, again, I would consider Jeet Kune Do a mixed martial art as well, right? Blending the kicking, the striking, the grappling arts. But no, I don't have anyone that has done cage fighting. He actually did a semi, you could call it quasi MMA. It's what we call a smoker, where he actually fought a representative from another school in a event basically in Bloomington, where they were full contact with takedowns. So he's done one fight. That was the first and only time I've ever actually coached in a full contact type of setting. But no, generally my students are more self-defense focused than actual competitive.
Okay. Dr. Love, Dr. Schillingrog, Ms. Johnson, Mark Mines, questions?
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Butler, thank you. It's very enlightening. It seems like a lot of the high profile cases we see with police, incidents, it seems like there's always a communications problem. And you talked about de-escalation, and so on the other side, we civilians don't really know what training you get. But I was just wondering, I think the de-escalation skills and the communication skills are very important. So could you talk us through sort of how much training do they get on that versus the physical, taking people down, all that stuff? And you think it's proportionate to what they need to get? And if not, how would you revamp the training?
Oh, good question. So I was the verbal de-escalation instructor for my department and the control tactics instructor. And so as far as how much training they get, it's going to vary based on department. Again, in the state of Illinois, every officer is required to have verbal de-escalation training in academy. And generally speaking, I believe in Illinois, it's every year, actually, minimum 40 hours a year of scenario-based use of force training, which includes verbal de-escalation. So there it is present, but as far as the need for it and the balance, I would say absolutely. I just don't like the idea of compartmentalizing it. That's my only concern, because I feel, and this is the way I like to train, is they should all be one use of force, right? So, because if you have verbal de-escalation day here, control tactics day here, firearms day here, right? They separate that in their mind, versus if we run scenarios where the officer has no idea what's going to happen, then I can have these scenarios where the vast majority, for example, can be set up where if the officer effectively uses their verbal skills, there's no physical contact. And what is that going to reinforce? Hey, if I use the right words and I use the right communication, we don't have to go hands-on. But if the officer makes a mistake, and then now for the sake of the scenario, you transition into something making them pay for that mistake for whatever that may be. So I think the type of training that interweaves the different forms of use of force is much better than having a verbal de-escalation day, right? It should be permeated in all of the training, especially the verbal de-escalation, right? It should be in everything an officer does as far as training. That component needs to be there, and that skill needs to be consistently practiced.
Good. Very good.
You mentioned, Dr. Butler, you mentioned the importance of, one of the aspects you mentioned the importance of was the civilians basically understanding what is the law and how to handle situations a little bit when you find yourself in a situation that might become confrontational with it, with a law enforcement officer. And it made me think about, I'm not sure how long ago this was. This may have been, this probably was here before you came to the area, but the situation down in Elgin when the young lady was pulled over by the state police, and I think she was shot and killed. She resisted, and I remember the community. I was a part of the ministerial team here that brought the chief of police of Elgin and some of his officers. We asked them to do this, and they agreed to come in to one of our services, one of our meetings at one of the larger churches there, and basically have a conversation with the community about how do you, if you're pulled over, how as a civilian, what is the officer looking at? What is the reaction? What is the communication they're giving? And how can we respond to that so that we're both in the process of de-escalating anything before it swells up? And it just made me think about it. Do you have any additional tips on that piece there? I mean, I thought that was the community seemed to receive that very well. And we got a big turnout for that. And the chief and his and he certainly brought in some of his leadership across a diverse background, because you're dealing with not only African Americans but Hispanic Americans. And it was a good beginning educational piece of that. So I just want to toss that out and see if you had any thoughts about any of that kind of communication, bridge type of communication.
Yeah, I think the complication when it comes to that is oftentimes, when a civilian gets pulled over, I'd say particularly a minority who has had, may have had many negative experiences. They're nervous. I remember as a cop, when I got pulled over, I was like, oh my God, like I was nervous as a cop. Well, I wasn't obviously on duty at the time, but so it's really a stressful event anytime an officer is behind you. So I think oftentimes it's difficult for even the civilian in the car to sort of focus and listen to what's being said and comply with what's being said. And then you have the officer who, let's say this officer is on the south side of Chicago, and every other car he pulls over may or may not have a gun in it, right? And he probably is seeing these things, or she is seeing these situations over and over again. So this officer tensions are high for them as well. So now you got this, again, this clash of both people being scared, right? Or both, not necessarily scared, but maybe, but both people being kind of stressed. So to me, with that in mind, it's a tough question to answer when we're talking communities like that, because it is rough. But I think from a civilian perspective, it's trying your best to comply, listen to what the officer's saying and comply. And then from the officer's perspective, it's trying to create more opportunities where they're having positive interactions with civilians. Because when the only time you are spending time with people who are not cops and not your family, the only time you have those experiences are when you're on the job, enforcing the law. You end up with a situation where anytime it's not your family and not a cop, they're the enemy, or they, not the enemy, but they're a potential threat. That's the better way to put that, right? So I think if officers have more positive interactions with people in the community, then I think that'll kind of lessen those. They won't think every time I pull a car over, every time I talk to someone when I'm on the job, that it's that dangerous. And it doesn't mean that they should let their guard down. I'm not saying that the officer should just act like nothing can happen, because the reality is officer safety needs to, be present. But at the same time, just consider that not everyone you come across is going to hurt you, but be alert, be present at the same time. So it's tough, right? It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. It was
Dr.
communicated.
Shimon? Oh,
It was
go ahead.
communicated a lot like what you just said too, Jeremy, because they brought the Black Officers Association in for part of that training too. The Black group, and they really did approach it. As I think back on it, they approached it pretty much like you said they should. Both sides, their experience, their fears, whatever's walking up to that situation. Yeah.
Okay.
So Dr.
Dr. Sherman Rock?
Yeah. Any plans to open up one of those youth programs up here? I know you just ended the one down there, but
Yeah,
Any plans?
I've been going back and forth about that a lot, and I don't know, maybe, but lately my focus has just been on trying to reach as many officers as I can, and really trying to change these standards of police training. So I think my focal point has kind of shifted to my police reform work, and then working full time as a professor as well, and having a wife and a 7-year-old daughter. Life just it just starts to build up. So maybe as I start to kind of level off with everything going on in life, and if I'm able to manage my life a little better, maybe. But as of now, it's not in my immediate thought process, to be honest with you.
Nadaline?
Well, actually, she stole my question, because I wanted to find out on this side if there's any opportunity for someone looking to master, more self-defense type training. Is there anything on this side for us? Even by the Crystal Lake area or so. That was my question.
So yeah, I would encourage you to just literally Google martial arts and wherever you want to type, and then pretty much everyone has some internet presence, and then just try out different schools to see if you find the right fit for you. Like, so if you're talking consistency and training. Now, as far as events, I definitely plan on doing lots of events throughout the years, but I just don't think I'm in a place where I can commit multiple days of the type of commitment that I would know I would put into it if I started a new program. I don't think I have the time right now in my life to do that, to be able to commit to that on several days a week, but as far as self-defense workshops and events, I definitely plan to hold multiple throughout the year for civilians as well as for law enforcement. But if you're looking for consistent training, I would say, yeah, Google different martial arts in your area and go check out the schools and see if you can find the one that's the right fit for you. I think that's the best step to go, because I don't necessarily usually like to specifically recommend one, because everybody is different. Every school has a different culture, and there are different personalities. So what may work for me as far as that culture, it may be, it may not work for another person. So I always encourage people to look at multiple schools, right? Watch, observe the classes, and see if it works for you or for your child or whoever you're doing it for. It's probably the best way of going about that.
Yeah, and I was part of a school, and I have a hidden agenda for asking that question, actually, because I was a part of a school. I got all the way up to the green belt level, but I find out that the culture that I recognized wasn't really for me. So I was looking for, now that things are starting to settle down again, I'm looking for another opportunity. And, hearing about the program that you have, I wanted to see if there was anything closer on your side. But I know that, I can Google and see what is in the area, just to finding the right fit.
And you should grab me on Sunday at church. We can talk more. Go into more detail on some.
I was going to say, like at
Definitely.
Trinity Baptist.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think
Absolutely.
Dana's
Thank
on
you.
this. Yeah, I think Dana's on this call.
I am. Yes, sorry. It took me a while to get here, but I missed the beginning, and I had actually was just chatting on the keyboard with Dr. Love. Jeremy, I wanted to hear how much you've shared about your book, just because I know how much time and energy you're pouring into it right now, and it's getting close to being done. And I hope you've just had a good platform to share a little bit about it.
Yeah, I've shared some about it, but basically it's called Stop Resisting, is the name of the book. And it is a lot of what we talked about today. It's written for early career officers, because I have this philosophy at this point, and this is based on some of my experiences, is that it's very hard to change minds that have been set in their ways for decades in some cases. So I'm not gonna say I gave up on that community. I'm just shifting my focus to officers who are newer to the field, because I think they're still more willing to hear other perspectives, and they're still a little bit more adaptable versus an officer who's been on the job for 15 years and they believe what they believe, right? So the book is really written more for an early career officer who may be at a department that doesn't have very good training, whether it be due to lack of resources or, again, lack of values for that. And where do you go to find quality training, and how should you be training as a police officer? What should that training look like, particularly if you wanted to explore the martial arts? So it's been going really well. I just finished my second round of beta readers for it. So I have actual cops looking at my manuscript and giving me feedback. So I just finished that round of that. And so at this point it's going into editing, and it'll be released this summer for sure. And I actually, and what was I about to say? I'm actually working on a event for the release as well. So hopefully that works out. Actually, a couple events for the release. So stay tuned this summer. If anybody wants more information about me or that, I would recommend connecting with me on LinkedIn. And if there are any officers or martial arts instructors that are listening, Jeremy Butler, Ph.D.com. I have a newsletter that I do one email a month, and it's a different tip or concept related to police use of force. And that'll also be the means of which I'll keep people up to date on when the book is released. So that's Jeremy Butler, Ph.D.com /free tips.
Excellent. Additional questions before we close out?
I just have one last question. And Karen brought up the topic of CCL. Dr. Butler, what are your thoughts or your input on when a police officer pulls you over in your concealed carry? I mean, I know legally you're not obligated to inform unless you're asked, and of course they're going to know already when they run your plate. But I mean, what are your thoughts or comments on voluntarily providing that information immediately?
Well, I do think that's a personal decision, but I would say, if we're thinking tactically, if the firearm that's in the car may may come up as a result of, let's say, a request, then most definitely, right? So if the officer says, I need your license and registration, for example, and you know your license is in your glove compartment and you know your firearm is in your glove compartment, then that's a good time to not go grab for it, but to say, hey, just FYI, I have a concealed carry license, my firearm is in my glove compartment. How would you like for me to proceed? What would you like for me to do? Right. So open communication in those type of situations, if you think it may come up, right? But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a personal decision. But again, it can be a dangerous situation, right? If you forget that it's in your center console and you just go to get it, and then the officer sees it, right? That could be a bad situation. So, but these are good things to think about if you choose to carry. Is think about how those situations could present themselves to make sure that we're staying safe.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to tag on to that. I know that in my training they recommend insurance, right? And so can you speak into that?
Insurance for specifically what?
Because you're carrying a weapon, that you should have insurance. I guess that's to represent you legally in case something happens.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's valid. I didn't I wasn't too aware of that being a commonality for concealed carry holders, but I mean it makes sense.
It was recommended. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it, Karen. I carry insurance with a U.S. Law Shield. I mean, because you're going to court if you ever use your firearm.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
mean, so it's, even if someone comes in your home, you're still going downtown to have some conversation.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so the insurance really is to limit your financial, liability. Because it could get dragged out. You could get sued by the family. There's a thousand different ways to get into trouble. And the insurance that I have covers pretty much everything, including my family members who may have access to my firearms in the house, right? So, even if you don't have concealed carry, even if you just own a firearm that's in your home, it covers you from that standpoint. So I definitely would not walk around without having that kind of insurance, because your homeowners doesn't have it. I mean, the umbrella policy doesn't cover it. That's a very specific coverage.
Okay.
Really good.
Great information.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Butler, I would thank you so much for agreeing to join me in the Friday night chat room. This has been a wonderful conversation, well informed. We're definitely praying for your success with your book. I love the fact that you talked about Carter G. Woodson, but you are modern day Carter G. Woodson, because you're not only in law enforcement, you have scholarships, you're writing, so you're doing a variety of things in your profession. So you're definitely a blessing to us at Trinity. And for everyone that's on this call, thank you for joining us tonight. My next Friday night chats is February 18th in honor of Black History, so everyone should receive a notification about that as well. But this is Dr. Karen Love. I want to say good night. I'm signing off, and God bless everyone.
Great job, Debbie. God bless you.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everybody. Bye, cuz.
Good team.
Bye, cuz.
Thanks, Dr. Love. Have a great night.
Thank you. Let's see. In meeting.